Y'all, UFC 292 takes place in honestly just a couple of hours. Low-key, I kind of waited till last minute to record this video. Last week, as most of you probably know, I wasn't able to get a video out because of some home life drama, but that's all settled and done with, so I'm good to record this one and get back to predicting fights. And if you guys checked my community page last week, I still predicted the fights, and I went 10-3 on the card, so not too bad. Got the main event right, and I'm on a 4-fight main event streak right now, so that's all pretty good. And this fight card, it's kind of mid, kind of all right. I mean, honestly, the main event and the co-main event are pretty hype. Out of 345 UFC fights this year, I've got 219 wins, which is like still a 64% win rate. I can't seem to escape that. 17-11 in main event picks, which is not terrible. I've seen worse. I'm just glad that we're getting out of some of the whack main events that we've had this year that were random as fuck, like the Holly Holm Buena Silva. That fucked me up. The star prospect of the night, in my opinion, is Damon Blackshear. He's coming off of last week's fight with a twister, only the third in UFC history, which is impressive as hell. And the fact that he's weighing in and now fighting Mario Batista, who's on a win streak himself, I just feel like you have to put him as a star prospect. The show stealer fight of the night, in my opinion, is the main event, Aljamain versus Suga. On paper and honestly in reality or in how it plays out, I feel like it's just going to be the best fight regardless. There might be something that is a sleeper, but I don't think it'll be better than that. And then the fighter in the oven, I think, is going to be Chito Vera. At this point, if he loses to somebody like Pedro Munoz, he's going to have to scratch any type of title aspirations from ever happening in the future. I mean, he could randomly pull off being one of the aging UFC champions, but I just don't see it with somebody like the style that Chito has. So let's get into the first fight of the night. Karine Silva taking on Marnia Moroz. I don't remember how to pronounce her name, but she got a really nice, an arm triangle on Maria Agapova, who is an upcoming prospect back like last year, to be honest, in the women's division. And that was pretty impressive to me. She fights out of Ukraine, and she's taking on Karine Silva, who's an upcoming prospect currently in the UFC. She has a couple of losses, but she's a finisher, and that's pretty rare in the women's divisions, especially in the unranked parts of it. So I'm going Karine Silva. Next up, we got Andrea Lee taking on Natalia Silva, another Silva, and another Brazilian prospect. Andrea Lee has lost to so many people in the UFC at this point in so many different ways, usually by getting demolished on the ground, even though she's a grappler and that's her strength. And Natalia Silva is not bad on the ground at all. She's also just better than Andrea Lee on the feet. Andrea Lee has a chance to win this by a boring decision where she, just holds her up against the cage, or maybe finds her moments to take her down and then just controls. I can't see her finishing the fight, so I'm going with Natalia Silva. Next up, the prelims, we got Andre Petroski taking on GM3, the GOAT. I just feel like the GOAT is kind of aging at this point, and we all know that his chin's been pretty suspect for a while now, and Andre Petroski is really coming into his own. In terms of grappling, I mean, if they're fresh, I feel like GM3 low-key could out-grapple Andre Petroski, which might be crazy to some of you, but I feel like his jiu-jitsu is just a huge threat to these middleweights, even though Petroski has the better wrestling. Ultimately, what I see happening, though, is Petroski's going to drop him with an overhand or land something really strong on the feet. GM3's going to stay in it, but he's going to be hurt, go to the ground, and then Petroski's going to wrap up like an anaconda or an arm triangle, just one of those bully types of chokes, and he's going to squeeze him out, and that's probably going to happen in like the second or the beginning of the third round. I feel like GM3 can last up until that point. Moving on, we've got the Ultimate Fighter finales. The first one, Brad Katona taking on Cody Gibson. Cody Gibson debuted against Aljamain Sterling, who's fighting at the end of the card way back in the day, like a decade ago, which is kind of crazy to think about. He's making his way all the way back into the UFC after fighting, getting cut, and then now climbing through the ranks of the Ultimate Fighter. The thing is, he's fighting Brad Katona, who's been a prospect from, I believe, England. I don't remember. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but for a while now. And Brad Katona's damn good. So I can see this fight being close. I can see Cody Gibson taking a round, but I think ultimately Brad Katona's probably going to win a unanimous decision, 29-28. Probably going to win the second and the third rounds. I could see Cody Gibson coming out really strong, but then getting wrestle-cucked for the rest of the fight. Moving on into the other Ultimate Fighter finale, Kurt Holobaugh taking on Austin Hubbard. I'm going to be honest, they both kind of suck, and that's why they were cut from the UFC in the first place, and not much has changed. Kurt Holobaugh was getting finishes on the Ultimate Fighter this time around, and Austin Hubbard was coming into way closer fights, almost lost a fight against Roosevelt Roberts. He got a split decision, but honestly, it could have gone either way. Funny enough, though, I'm still going to be picking Austin Hubbard. I actually feel like he is going to be able to outland Holobaugh on the feet. His takedown defense is good enough to keep him up, and I think he's just going to be outlanding him and eventually find the right shots to TKO him. I don't know why, but these Ultimate Fighter fights usually end up being pretty good and usually end up in a finish or just a war. Moving on up the prelims, we got Gregory Rodriguez taking on Dennis Tululin. This fight is going to be crazy. Honestly, it could have been the sleeper fight of the night, but I had to go with the main event. Gregory Rodriguez is just a freak of a man. I can't believe he got knocked out by Bruno Silva earlier in the year. I feel like he could just take the shots a lot better than Dennis Tululin will be able to. They're going to be trading in the first round. Tululin's probably going to be able to take the shots pretty well at first, but Gregory Rodriguez is just going to keep pouring on the pressure, and eventually one of those shots is going to find the mark and catch Tululin and put him down bad, and I feel like that's just going to spell the end of the fight from there. So I'm going to be going with Gregory Rodriguez by, let's call it a first round TKO. I don't think it'll be a clean knockout. And then the prelim headliner, we've got Chris Weidman returning from his nasty leg break injury from, I don't even remember what pay-per-view it was, but it was like 2 years ago now. And he's taking on Brad Tavares, who is always going to be a tough matchup for any middleweight. He's just really fucking good. He's fought so many people, so he's solid. Oddly enough, I'm going to be picking Chris Weidman. I was leaning towards Tavares the whole time, but then I saw how good a shape Weidman was in. He really does seem like he genuinely wants to push for a championship run at middleweight. And if he stays fit like the way he is and mentally sharp, I could see it happening with the skill set he has and the collegiate wrestling background and the fact that he's already been a champion. He is going to look aged and he's not going to look the same as he used to. I accept that. But Brad Tavares is a vet at this point as well. He has a lot of losses, more than Weidman. He has more ways to lose. So I am going to side with Weidman finding his takedowns and just controlling the fight for a decision win. Moving on up the card, we've got Chito Vera taking on Pedro Munoz. We're kicking off the main event now. The main card. And I know everyone's picking Chito. This is his type of fight. He wants to get into a scrap like this with somebody like Pedro, who's got a chin and will just sit there and trade with him in the pocket or at close range. But I feel like Pedro Munoz is going to tear up Chito's legs bad in the first round, try to keep it going in the second and the third, but Chito's going to adapt to that. But at that point, the damage will have already been done. And I feel like Pedro Munoz has way better of a chin than Marlon does, despite the fact that Marlon has a great chin. And I think that Pedro Munoz is just going to be able to take the better shots, maybe lose a close split decision, but I'm going to have to lean towards him taking at least 2 rounds, and the judges hopefully not being speds and, knowing what they're watching and knowing how to judge it. And I think Pedro Munoz is going to win off a decision. I'd be really surprised if either of these men got finished either way, because they're both really good on the ground. I'd say Marlon just a little bit better than Pedro. But Pedro's defensive wrestling, defensive grappling is probably a bit better than Chito's. But then when it comes to the offensive grappling, Chito is just probably like a head and shoulders above Pedro, to be honest. I haven't seen much from Pedro Munoz in terms of offensive grappling. But from Chito, way back in the day when he was debuting in the UFC or just like coming up, he was throwing up subs like crazy. Moving on up the card, Damon Blackshear taking on Mario Batista. So this is my prospect of the night, Damon Blackshear. He's coming off of the third twister submission in UFC history, which is just fucking crazy. And he's the first fighter to be fighting 7 days back to back, like within 7 days. I think Khamzat fought within 10, if I'm not mistaken. But this is just crazy. Like, for modern day UFC history, not in a tournament or anything like that, Damon Blackshear is really putting himself in the spotlight, and I appreciate that from a fighter that, really didn't have as much hype as he does now coming into this week. Mario Batista is a teammate of Sean O'Malley. He's on a win streak, and he's been finishing a lot of fighters. But I just have this weird feeling that Damon Blackshear is going to be carrying this hype and momentum and carrying the confidence from getting that twister last weekend, despite the competition not being that great, and he's going to come out here and dominate. So I'm going Damon Blackshear. Moving on now into the feature fight of the night, we've got Neil Magny versus Ian Gary. And we actually have a little bit to talk about here because Ian Gary took an interview clip that Neil Magny had earlier in the week on Media Day completely out of context and makes it seem like Neil Magny beats his 3-year-old kid. And then he brought it up at the press conference again, continued fueling the fire. He was basically telling Neil Magny to shoot the fuck up and sit there and do what you're told. He's trying to sound like Conor McGregor, but honestly, anybody that's Irish and has some swag about them is going to sound like him, so I don't really think it's that big of a deal. He was really, really bullying Neil Magny, and Neil Magny was looking kind of emotional. He was starting to chirp back on the mic, which you never see from Neil Magny. And I feel like this is just like part of Ian Gary's plan. I feel like he knows that Neil Magny didn't really say what he's trying to imply that he said, and he's really just trying to get in his head and piss him off and make it so he's going to be more ready to have a fist fight, which just plays into Ian Gary's hands perfectly. He wants Neil Magny not to be the scrappy veteran fighter that Neil Magny typically is, so he can get a clean knockout, and I think that's what's going to happen. I'm betting on Ian Gary. I think all of you guys should, because he just has the perfect style matchup for somebody like Neil Magny. And they're both lanky. That's usually Neil Magny's strength, but now he's going to be having to fight a younger, slicker fighter with kind of the same type of build. So I just think that's bad for Neil Magny. Like, all of that adds up and just kind of spells doom for him, in my opinion. But if Neil Magny can fight through whatever he's dealing with mentally from that Ian Gary verbal abuse, maybe it could fuel him, and maybe he could really come in and fuck him up. But I'm going Ian Gary. Then we got the co-main event of the night, Weili Zhang taking on Amanda Lemos. I'm kind of surprised that Amanda Lemos is as big of an underdog as she is, because she has freakish power for a female strawweight. She could definitely land and put Weili's lights out. We've seen her get knocked out flush by a head kick, so we know that it can happen, even though head kick's a little bit different than like a straight or a hook or some shit, which is what I think Amanda Lemos would land if she did knock Weili out. She could go for the head kick, but I think Weili's just too good at this point, and she's way quicker than Amanda Lemos. She's also a bit better of a grappler. The only it factor here is Amanda Lemos' crazy, ridiculous power, and just like she swings like she's a baseball player, and like she has that natural torque, natural hit power. But I'm still gonna have to side with Weili. I mean, we can't forget she's also a power hitter for that division, and she's just way more proven. Amanda Lemos got choked out in the first round by fucking Jessica Andrade, and I can't get that out of my mind. Like, no matter what win she gets in the next year, if they're not against like a champion, she got choked out by somebody who's on a terrible losing streak. Like, that just doesn't look good. And she got choked out with an arm triangle standing. So I gotta go with Weili. And then we got the main event of the night, Aljamain Sterling taking on Sean O'Malley, Suga Shane. I know that Aljamain Sterling is on paper the GOAT of the bantamweight division, and I know that on paper it's more likely that his style is going to overwhelm Sean's style. And if it does, it's probably a wrap. It's a wrap like Aljo says. It's going to be bad for Sean. But Sean's not completely useless on the ground. I think he's definitely going to be able to defend the first or second takedown, maybe even the third from Aljamain. It would be more like if Aljamain really does secure it, it would have to be after those first couple. And he'd have to just keep pressing the issue and just find awkward angles and awkward spots in the cage, or just catch him up in like just random things, like catch him off balance. He's going to have to do something funky like that and live up to his nickname if he really wants to dominate Sean on the ground. I don't even think that he'll be able to catch him just clean, early, dry like he did to Sandhagen. Sean's too quick, and he's too good at finding people's chins while they're moving in on him, looking for their own type of offense or like grappling. He's just proven that he can snipe you time and time again. And that's why I have to go with Sean O'Malley. I've just been having this feeling, the same feeling I had when Izzy first won his belt, same feeling I had when Glover Teixeira was fighting Jan Blachowicz, same feeling I had when Valentina lost her belt earlier this year. Sometimes it feels like it's time for a champion to lose his belt, and it's time for a contender to take over, and it feels like that is this time right now for Sean O'Malley. So I'm going to go with Sean O'Malley by probably by second round knockout, really early into the round. I think in the first round he's going to hurt him bad and probably drop him. Aljo's tough, so he's going to stay in it. But then that weight cut is really going to start to weigh on him, I think. And in the second round, Sean's going to get him out of there. And if it doesn't happen, I know a lot of people are going to be happy because Sean O'Malley has so many haters. I mean, when you're that famous and that popular, it's bound to happen. But yeah, that'll be all for today, guys. So drop a sub if you fuck with the content as usual. This one was a little bit longer than I usually make them, but I feel like I had to because I didn't post last week. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'll catch y'all.